All right, my friends, we are back with another episode of The Deep End, number 24. Ari, my man, I'm happy to see you today. I'm so stoked to be back here for another conversation with you. And before we move on any further, how are you today, man? How is Mr. Gutman?
Wow, man, I gotta be real. I'm happy to be here. Every week I'm happy. I look forward more than anything. I know all the listeners out there are always like, "Oh, we look forward to, jumping on," and some of you are working out, and some of you are on runs, and some of you are in the car or cleaning the house, all things I've read, and you're
Yeah.
looking forward to listening to us. But I gotta be real. I'm looking forward to just chatting with Ryan and really chatting with everybody out there. This is the highlight of my week. So I'll start off with that. I also want to take another moment here to just say we are powered up by Blossom. So everybody out there, if you're not on Blossom, there's a link down there in the description in the pinned comment. What do you get out of Blossom? Everything and more you could ask for as an investor, including all the updates real time on Ryan's portfolio and mine. And so I guess I'll start, man, by saying I slid down a bit in the market here. I was at 280 and then I slid down. I just before we popped on, I saw I was at 278 and something changed there, and I'm all right with it. I think the biggest hit I took so far, besides my big L, which is still United Health, I actually took a position back up in Visa last week. What was it last? No, a couple days ago rather. And I was super stoked about that. I thought about selling it yesterday for the myopic gain that I had, and I held on to it. And actually, I'm down $88 in Visa. It's not crazy. I think it's just going to jump right back up, considering maybe buying some more if it slides down to like 340 today. Even less than that, I'll probably buy some more because I'm still bullish on Visa long term. And I
Yeah.
guess I'll just share, what I looked into with Visa. It's all stablecoin hype, which I kind of want to talk to you about. But before we get into that topic of conversation, how's the Ryan Williams almost $100,000 portfolio?
Well, like you, man, I saw a little bit of a haircut this week so far. I think last week when we chatted, I was at 99,100 dollars, somewhere in that range. Right now I'm at about 97.5, so we're down about 1,600 bucks. But like you said, it's all good. Visa has definitely been one of the biggest catalysts for this pullback. It's all like kind of like you said, it's all due to news or whisperings of like it's just Amazon and Walmart, from my understanding. These two companies maybe potentially thinking about coming out with their own stable coins, which I guess would put Visa out of business. And so
That's
that's
the
really
scare.
where that's the scare. So yeah, Visa's one that's seen a nice pullback. I was looking earlier before we recorded. I think now in the last month, I didn't look at the 5 day period or anything like that, but in the last month, I think it's down now about 6 or 7%. So that's a pretty, and I would imagine most of that drop has come within the last week or so, week and some change. So definitely a big pullback there. Zoetis actually today is taking kind of a little pullback as well. I think they were just downgraded from like a buy to a hold over concerns about potential slowdown in revenue growth. I don't know, dude. It's to me that's a lot of that stuff is just noise. Whatever. Okay. Maybe it'll slow down. Maybe there will be a stable coin. I don't know. Maybe the world will end. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? But let's upgrade and let's downgrade things. Why not?
I was going to say, with an upgrade or downgrade, or just a whole. First of all, I think it's really interesting. I used to work, for any of you who don't know my past story here, I used to work at Tip Ranks. And so what's interesting about Tip Ranks is the fact that they rate analysts. And, one of the things I always heard from customers was the fact that they love to look at analyst ratings. But what's always interesting to think about is like how many times you ever see an analyst rating a stock a sell. Very, very rare. And then you ask yourself why that is, and because they have ins at certain companies, they want to get invited to certain events. So if you let's just take Apple, it's always a fun one to talk about, especially for analysts. But it always had one of the most bullish ratings, on TipRanks, has it's one of the positions or stocks rather that has the most analysts rating it, at any given time. Hot stock, popular. So who's going to rate Apple a sell ever? You want to get invited to every single Apple event you possibly can to be there in the know. And so God forbid you rate a stock a sell. Well, there goes your ticket in the door. So bare minimum, you're going to rate it a hold. And even on top of that, though, you got to start to question, well, what exactly is the timeline for these analysts? Because what may be a near-term revenue miss is a long-term revenue gain. How, you got to, again, we always talk about this, Ryan, but playing the finite game versus the infinite game, and how long are you going to be invested? What's your strategy? So a lot of the times these analysts are just literally, that monkey with the, the two pans symbols, or whatever. Yeah. That's what an analyst is, just making noise every day, like ding, ding, up, down, down. It's like we can't be alarmed by that.
No, absolutely not. And I, kind of adding to your point, I don't know where I read this, or I think I heard one of my friends, the dividend collector, is an analyst on Seeking Alpha, or he's a contributor or a writer on Seeking Alpha. And I think he was telling me, or maybe he was saying this in a conversation with Russ, but he was saying that, I don't know, I think it was him. He really didn't like that there was a buy, hold, sell rating on Seeking Alpha. When you write an article, you have to give it one of those labels, everything from a strong sell all the way up to a strong buy. You can't not assign it one of those values. And I think he was saying he didn't really like that that type of setup because, kind of to your point, Apple might be seeing, or whatever company might be seeing, some softness in revenue, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a sell. But then at the same time, you also can't, these analysts also won't write an article about how growth is going to slow down and then rate it a buy. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of a wonky system, but they're confined to those labels, and they have to put these stocks in one of those few boxes when writing about them. And I wonder what would be a better way to do that? Would it be better to say, instead of assigning it a strong sell to a strong buy, instead would it make more sense to say, kind of like a Mad Libs, I think it's going to either go up or down. You pick the share price. I think the share price will either go up or down and then select the time period, 1 year, whatever, 6 months, or pick whatever time period. I wonder if that would be, or something else would be a better system for writing about these things, because it's kind of misleading.
So it's interesting because TipRanks actually had a tool. It was one of my, when I would do these webinars, these live webinars for all of the TipRanks customers, I would always lead them to a specific tool if they wanted to use analyst information. Because what I never BS'd around. I always said you could use analyst ratings as a signal, but don't use it as your real due diligence, because it really doesn't mean anything. But if you're gonna use analysts, they did have a cool feature where you could go to an analyst page and actually, you would go to a stock page, and then you get to the analyst ratings, and then if you scroll all the way, I never knew why they put this all the way at the bottom of the page, but all the way at the bottom there would be 3 analysts, and it would be a 3-month, a 1 year, and a 5-year analyst. And I thought that's a much better way to do it. What was the best analyst for the next 3 months, 1 year, and 5 years out? And to your point, I think that's exactly what that tool was hitting. We have to get more specific. If you're a long-term investor, what the heck do you care if revenue is a miss next month? Actually, you care because you want to buy more when everybody's freaking out that revenue was a miss.
Yeah. Yeah. And, when you get to the root of it too, this all ties back to, and I'm going all the way back to this thing with Visa, or this downgrade with Zoetis. It really all comes back to humans not liking uncertainty. We don't like uncertainty in the short term. We don't like lumpiness. We would much prefer revenue growth, or pick the metric, whatever it is, we would much prefer it to be smooth and straight up and to the right at a steady and aggressive and perpetual slope. But the world is not perfect like that. In something like the stock market, which is this very complex and constantly changing system, it just doesn't work that way. And so you have to be prepared for some lumpiness. And just because, going back to the monkey with symbols, just because, and I don't know, it kind of sounds mean to call him just that, but the point is, like, you shouldn't take that stuff too seriously, because part of their job is to drum up these opinions on a regular basis. And you can't let that change your opinion of a company that you plan to hold for a long period of time. So
look, I will just come out and share this. I used to talk a lot to these analysts, and won't mention any names, but I was speaking to an analyst, and he left the street. He left Wall Street, and he was just sharing with me, don't you think it's funny that people are so wrapped up in what the analysts have to say, how much weight we put into their, for example, like the estimates that they give, but like that, like as much due diligence as they're doing and research as they're trying to pour into these stocks, even if a stock misses, what the hell were the estimates anyways? We're comparing whether or not a company is in good standing financial condition by analyst estimates.
Some arbitrary number, right?
Yeah. That these analysts were like, it should hit here. And then we're like, oh, it didn't hit there, so it's not a good company. Downgrade, Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's so funny that we're talking about this, man. I'm in the middle of reading the book Dear Shareholder by Lawrence Cunningham. I don't know if you've heard of that or read that, but basically what it is, it's a compilation of different shareholder letters from different CEOs and managers. It's got and it's the key takeaways, basically the key snippets from all of their writing. So you've got Warren Buffett, you've got who else? You've got I'm reading through the lady who used to run Pepsi. I don't remember her name. It's got the guy from Constellation Software, but anyway, the guy who founded Morningstar, I think his name was Joe Mansueto or something along those lines. He wrote exactly about this. I just read it yesterday. And he basically said, we don't issue guidance. We don't issue earnings guidance on a quarterly basis or no guidance whatsoever, just for that reason. It creates these arbitrary expectations that now we feel this sense of pressure to live up to. And it's just not good for anyone to put that pressure on ourselves. Like, it creates poor incentives in the short term to live up to these what really end up being meaningless expectations. And it kind of makes you, it can lead you to miss the forest for the trees when it comes to thinking about these companies from a long-term perspective. It puts pressure on you to get so fixated on meeting numbers in the short term. And I could be wrong about this. I think it was Jack Welch. He was the old CEO of GE. I think one of his things, correct me if I'm wrong about this, guys, but I think one of his things was, we are going to hit our numbers every single quarter, no matter what. And, they did that. But there was a lot of financial maneuvering. There was a lot of tomfoolery that happened behind the scenes that led to them meeting those numbers perfectly every single quarter. And it turned out to be not entirely based in reality. And so it can really mess with your incentives if you try and live up to analyst estimates every quarter.
Well, this just goes to say, there's a book. My dad always gave me these old school sales books and and leadership books and everything in between. But they were like the old school, right? Like the originals.
Those were your bedtime stories growing up?
No bedtime stories. It was just like, here, Ari, here's a like all the dust flies off. These are good books to read. You should read them. And they were fantastic books.
No Captain Underpants for Ari.
No, there's nothing, none of that for me, man. I was watching the Military Channel by 8 or 9 years old. So that's my childhood. But, I'm reading, I read a lot of these books. One of those books was I'm forgetting the title of the book, but it was about Jack Welch and when he came to GE and how exactly he would operate. And I think there were elements, right, when we study leaders like Jack Welch that are fantastic, elements. He's a good leader. He had, good charisma. He would walk in the room. He would take command of the room. People admired him, respected him, looked up to him. These are all great. But when it actually comes down to running the company for what it truly is and what it needs to be, I would not make the case for Jack Welch that he was a CEO that should be emulated. And that is for the exact reason that you already mentioned. It came down to cooking the books, because when you start to make these statements, we're going to hit every single quarter by any means necessary. Not only is that a ton of pressure on everybody, but that just makes your finance department I want to say like the Gestapo of earnings. Like we got to make it. We got to make it all work. And so was GE then a great company? Now that's hard to say, because what do we really know about them, and how they operated? We know that they finessed a lot of their financing in order to hit Jack Welch's goals.
Mm-hmm.
On the other end of this whole deal, I love the fact of throwing out, forward guidance, because let's just take one, a week and a half ago, I sat right here and I said I was going to be in Cyprus, and my event to speak, and I'm not there because of certain circumstances, geopolitically. And so no one can see that coming. And so God forbid you make these statements as a company, outright. Some of these outlandish statements is, hey, we're going to hit this. This is what we're going to bring in. If you don't do that, all of a sudden you've sent a shockwave through Wall Street and investors because you didn't do something that you couldn't predict anyways.
Yeah.
It's a very dangerous, slippery slope.
Very well said, man. And it makes a statement too. Like going back to Jack Welch, him making the statement saying we're going to hit it every single quarter at all costs is a sole focus on what happens in the short term. That's pretty much where the incentives were aligned. That's all that mattered, was what happened in the short term on a quarter to quarter basis. By not issuing guidance, by coming out and saying we're not going to even try and guess what next month's or quarter's numbers are going to be. But with an asterisk attached to that is also the statement, and it also doesn't matter, is what they're saying. And I really respect that. And I think it says the opposite thing. It says that they are not worried about what happens in the short term. They are solely focused on what happens in the long term. And as a result, companies like this will probably be more willing to make decisions that may not look great in the short term, but are sacrifices today for the betterment of tomorrow. And if you are a long-term investor, you should look for those things. And I will tell you this, like one thing that I've picked up from reading this book, I will say this book so far, I'm almost done with it, but this book so far has been very repetitive. It's honestly not been my favorite read for that reason, but what I've gotten most out of it is what to look for in how management talks and how they write. Because all of these guys, all of the people in this book thought solely about the long term. They all had long-term mindsets, and you can really see that in the writing. And that, I think, tells you what to, gives you good examples of what to look for in management. And I know for me, part of this whole experience of learning about investing, that's kind of been the biggest thing for me. That was, or I guess what I'm trying to say is that has been the biggest struggle, is knowing what to look for in a good management team. And after going through this book, it's clicking. It's like, look for management who is talking like these guys are talking, who are saying, we don't care what happens in the short term. In fact, we might do pretty bad in the short term, but we'll be good in the long term. And that's really what we're shooting for. And this book is littered with basically people saying the same thing in a different way. And that's kind of why I'm like, it's getting a little repetitive. But these are important messages to to absorb, and I think for anyone looking for a good book to read or another book to read, check this one out. I'm not really making the best case in selling it, but I think this has been a pretty valuable lesson, and that's been a really big and important takeaway for me. So for that reason, I would recommend it.
As you're sharing that, I think it's a pretty important point. We always talk about too, when you're looking at a company to invest in, take a look at to the best that you can their management team. What can you dig up about them? What's the history behind some of their leaders? And I think what's really important, when looking at a leader, and I'll even go here, whether in the market, with these companies that we're investing into, or in life, that long-term mindset, it's really the infinite mindset, is going to be, I think, by and large, the best indicator of someone's success. If someone is so focused on the short term, you really have to watch out for their longer term play, because in that short term burst, there's usually a lot of burnout and pressure, unnecessary pressure. And so what happens under those circumstances, usually in these companies, and everybody can probably think of a scenario or two in their own life where this has been the case. Maybe you've been on a school project. Maybe you've had a recent work assignment when the deadline's coming up. Maybe there's been some slacking going on. There's always one team leader who takes charge. How did that team leader manage? Maybe that team leader was you, right? And it's just how was that situation managed? Because if it's managed with a long-term mindset, it's a smooth process. It's always smooth sailing. But when it's rushed and pressurized, not only does it get choppy, but the whole team's performance goes down. Because everybody's feeling the pinch of pressure. Mm-hmm. And so we see that even if you look at like when Bill Gates left Microsoft in the hands of Steve Ballmer, and you could just see like what it was all about, earnings. And so what happened was sacrifice. What really happened was sacrificed on the product, and that's just the nature of the beast. And so it then brings me to this point in knowing that, we'll just use the S&P 500. 500 of the biggest companies in the United States. Not all of these companies are phenomenal companies just because they're in the S&P. And I think if we go and start to highlight all the leaders, they're high performers, but there's something to say about each and every CEO or each and every leader. Not all of them are visionaries. And so then you get down to the Mag 7s, and usually these guys are the visionaries, right? Or like the industry leaders usually have visionaries as their leaders, not just CEOs, not just managers. He's coming in for the show.
Sorry, I had to open the window for Peanut. It's he's got to keep watch. It's 10:41, so he's just clocking in for his mid-morning shift, looking out the window.
Any morning dogs?
No, we might see some birds though. We might see some birds, and if we do, you'll hear him.
It's Peanut's house. You're just paying the rent.
Yeah, exactly, man. Exactly. No, but that's a great point, man. And a lot of the great CEOs, a lot of the great founders have this forever mindset, and I think this kind of ties into quality. We talk about quality being like an important thing to seek out in an investment. You want to invest in high quality companies, not just cheap companies. You want to go for quality. And I think that can only be found in businesses that have this long-term mindset, because that permeates through the entire business, from how they, approach their products, from how the internal incentives amongst their employees. It ripples throughout the entire company. That's another thing that I'm learning from this book, and just in all the different ways that's true. And you want to, especially as a long-term investor, and maybe not everyone is, in which case maybe you're playing a different game, and you should be potentially looking for a Jack Welch CEO, Maybe. But for those of you who are long-term investors and want to hold on to your assets for a long period of time to the point where you potentially never sell them, then you want to look for these businesses who can continue to delay gratification and are thinking not just 1 year or 2 years or 3 years into the future, but are thinking 5, 10, 20 years down the road. So, and I don't know, some people might be hearing all this and think, you guys are such nerds. You guys are getting just like, you're overthinking it. You're getting too deep in the weeds. Why would you do this stuff and think about this stuff and talk about this stuff when you can just buy the S&P, even though they're not all great? It's like most of them are good. Like it's done pretty well. It's the gold standard. Why don't you just do that and call it a day? And it's like, but man, this is where the fun is. Thinking about this stuff and spending time digging into this stuff and whatever. And we've talked about this before, but I think that's where the fun is.
I was literally, you just pulled the words right from me. I was gonna say that. I wasn't gonna, say the S&P specifically. I was gonna even broaden it and just go and say an ETF. Yeah. With the ETFs that are out nowadays, I mean, we have 1.5 million of vehicles that we can pick to invest into, and these vehicles didn't exist 30, 40, 50 years ago. Like, these are brand new investment vehicles. Now, again, almost 4,000 ETFs out there, and that means not all of them are great ETFs. You got to be careful there too, but you have a higher likelihood, if a lot of what Ryan and I are saying isn't really jiving well with you, or you're not really into it, then the ETF route probably is the best route for you. Because at least I've found, and I was gonna make a Blossom post about this just the other day. I was gonna nitpick like some of the stocks that just tanked over the last week or went up based on current events. And I was gonna say, for anybody who doesn't have their head on the swivel or eyes on the news, catching what's happening in the world, then probably investing into individual stocks isn't necessarily for you. And you should go with the ETF route because you really don't have to do anything as a S&P 500 investor. You just blindly throw money in every week or every month. But if you're an individual stock investor and you're really looking to capitalize, and then again, depending on what your investment strategy is, like for me, I love every now and then to do a little swing trade. And so that's where the Visa came back into the picture. I have my core stocks, and then when I see an opportunity, I have money on the sidelines where I'm like, let me toss some money in, get a little swing in there, and I get all jacked up about it, and then boot it from the portfolio again, and wait dollar cost averaging where I need to. For me, that's where the fun is, and it's also important to recognize, I think, we do have opportunities to outperform the S&P 500. But there's a key element here to think about. Not every stock is going to outperform the S&P 500. So if you are investing and you just find yourself falling short of the S&P 500 pretty consistently, then either you might want to recheck your strategy, how you're doing due diligence, or literally just invest in the S&P. Because that's where the fun really comes in. Am I outperforming the S&P or not?
So that brings up a good question. Like, do you think there's a way to tell, or do you think there are things that you can look at that can help you, I guess, gauge whether or not a stock could potentially outperform the S&P? Are there certain metrics you look at? How do you, or is it impossible to know? And we're not talking about like a short period of time. We're talking about, let's assume that we're talking about a long period of time. How do you determine that? How do you, I don't know, I guess work that into your process?
I think when it comes to outperforming the S&P, it's not, as much as I want to say it's all about, the financials and the health of a company. It's really, for the most part, in my opinion. And I'd love for anybody and everybody to disagree with me, including you, Ryan. So everybody, you could feel free to just comment away that, Ari, you're totally wrong. Here's what I think. I think, though, when you're trying to evaluate what stock is going to outperform the S&P, we're talking about the above average players who are going to do that, because a lot of stocks don't outperform. And so we have to start to take a look at what stocks do. And the stocks that consistently outperform the S&P, like year over year, are consistently outperforming, these are the innovators. And I think in order to really find and pick the stocks that are going to outperform the S&P 500, they really have to be on like the cutting edge of innovation and bringing something that's new to the market that's going to continuously be at least, I don't mean like major shock and awe moments every year to the S&P or to the market, but at least like these little jolts of energy. And so you find, of course, the Mag 7s are like this, right? You get like a Google or, and I don't want to use NVIDIA because it's so new, to this Mag 7 grouping. But we can use Tesla for an example. If a couple years ago you were only looking at Tesla's financials, maybe not even a couple years ago, this is how fast time has gone by, man. Almost like 8 or 9 years ago, when Tesla was coming to market, the company almost defaulted. Elon Musk almost had, it was the end of Tesla if you were looking at the financials. And so what did people really bet on was actually Elon Musk and the technology that he was trying to produce or create.
It was the story and the main character in that story.
Yeah, for sure. And then, if we do, look at a GE situation. Okay, it's appliances we're talking. There's nothing sexy about appliances, but
I don't know, man. You haven't seen my dishwasher.
Have you seen this fridge?
That thing has got a body.
Just shined it this morning. But it's Jack Welch that comes in with his charisma and shine and sex appeal. It's, Steve Jobs dies and everybody, an amazing company, innovated like crazy. But you know what? None of that mattered when Steve Jobs died, because everybody was worried sick that Tim Cook wasn't going to be able to take the company to where it is today. And by the way, it wouldn't be, the book After Steve does a great job. And after reading this book After Steve, Ryan, I've been watching every single Tim Cook interview I possibly can. What I love to do is get inside the mind of these CEOs. I love how these thinkers think. And I love watching how articulated they are and how they will listen to a question, analyze the question. You can see them analyzing in their mind and then okay, here's like this. It's like chess. Anyways, there's, even Tim Cook will say it. Apple couldn't have been Apple without Steve Jobs. But Apple couldn't be Apple, the $1 trillion plus market cap company that it is today, without Tim Cook. But Tim Cook didn't bring in the sex appeal that Steve Jobs had. And so for 2 years, people were worried sick that Apple was just not going to make it.
I don't remember and maybe I wasn't paying attention at that time or in the market, but I don't know what Apple did during that time. The share price, was it going down pretty significantly?
It was trading sideways for a bit. And then it was revenue was going down. They weren't really innovating because it was like you had this massive, the innovator was gone, right? And then you had Johnny Ives running Apple in the creative side, and Tim Cook
he was like the designer, right?
Yeah. And so it wasn't until I just watched an interview on this too. Tim Cook says it wasn't about until 2 years into Tim Cook taking the reins that we actually started to get some real upside again with Apple, because people had faith then in Tim Cook. Johnny Ives designed the Apple Watch. That was new. The iPhone 6 came out. All these crazy innovations flooded the market. And most importantly, though, Tim Cook got on a stage and became Tim Cook, the Tim Cook we know today. It wasn't like the Tim Cook in Steve Jobs' shadow. It was Tim Cook, I'm the CEO of Apple. And it's It's just crazy to think about how much a leader, a visionary, I think can change the trajectory of a company. We're seeing it, by the way, with United Health. Same thing happened with United Health, right? Out with the old, in with the new, and everybody's more optimistic now about United Health. And so that's my thoughts. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I definitely think that's part of it. And you listed some really good examples of where that's the case. And I think when you dive a bit deeper into, okay, what actually is driving the share price in those situations, it's the sentiment towards the company. What No matter whether it's driven by the financials or whether it's driven by the story or the CEO, it's how people feel about it at any given time. And this goes back to, I think this goes back to Ben Graham's quote about in the short term it being a voting machine, in the long term being a weighing machine. But I think in some of these examples, what we're experiencing is the voting machine, it being a voting machine, could last quite a long time. And as long as there's a story that's still kind of playing out, which can take some time to happen, that's certainly the case with Tesla, and it's had its ups and downs. But yeah, I think there are times where we underestimate just how much human emotion and sentiment can drive share prices. But I don't know. And I guess with that said, it kind of, I don't know if it conflicts with what Warren and Charlie might say, which is over a long period of time. Well, I guess this is Ben Graham too, about it being a weighing machine. It follows earnings or it follows the financials. Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think that's true as well. But because as time goes on, we're always still in periods where we can have short-term movements. And if that's true, then human behavior will always have some impact on share prices. So, yeah, I think in a lot of ways, and going back to the examples that we threw out at the very beginning of this conversation, Visa and Zoetis, man, that's all the 4% Zoetis is down today. Actually, Visa's the same, but the 7% Visa's down in the last week and a half. That's all just coming from how people feel about the company now that a certain opinion has come out about something that may or may not happen. So it's all human emotion, really, and it's got me thinking. Like, I guess it's got me thinking about other styles of investing, and it thinking about the human element in this and the emotional element really allows me to see the merit in investing in things that are driven by momentum. We talk, I certainly talk a lot about maybe being careful of like the Palantirs or the SoFis or even the Teslas or whatever that are in a lot of ways driven by hype, momentum, and just FOMO and people piling in. But man, there's some real merit to that. And if you have a good sense of human psychology and what humans collectively are thinking about a certain company, you can really make some money based on that, or lose money too if you're not good at that stuff and try to play that game. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you have to be, I think, an artist in some sense in order to really paint that picture.
Yes.
And I think you're spot on. When you talk about Visa, and I'm going to use Bitcoin as a great example here. Okay, everybody's so hyped up about Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's going to change the world, and Bitcoin this, and Bitcoin that. When's the last time, Ryan, you had to pay for something with Bitcoin?
It hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't happened yet. I'm not here to say, because there might be some Bitcoin fanatics out there, I'm not here to say that might never, that's going to happen or never happen. Who knows? Ryan might have, in 5-10 years, a Bitcoin wallet and he's paying for everything in Bitcoin then. But for right now, and by the way, me too, I have never paid for anything in Bitcoin. Sometimes I walk on the street and I see a change, Euro exchange place that's, exchange your Bitcoin here too. I'm like, I want to know who's walking in there saying, like, I got this Bitcoin, I want to take it for cat. So I'm sitting here saying when I look at Visa or MasterCard or Amex, any of these cards, credit card companies, I'm saying to myself, while it may be true the Amazons of the world and the Walmarts of the world may come out with a stable coin, how long? When exactly is that going to happen? And when it does happen, what will be the actual impact of people immediately switching over to use a different technology? I don't think these technological advancements impact us as fast and as efficient as we think they do. Think back to 2020. We needed masks to be made and medical equipment ASAP. We had the technology for 3D printing for years. It wasn't relevant until 2020. Then in 2020, all of the 3D printing stocks shot up. 3D printing is going to change the world. It's going to start creating refrigerators. It's going to start creating planes, trains, buses, whatever. And what happened? Has anybody even freaking heard of 3D printing stocks these days anymore? No. So are we using 3D printing today still? We certainly are. But that colossal impact just hasn't hit. So again, it goes back to this freak out mode when you hear the news. But at the end of the day, I still use my credit card twice today. Tomorrow I'm going to use it again. I don't know. I don't understand that panic from people. And so I even think if you're able to be patient enough to sit and not panic, not be emotional, and just really take a step back and say okay, how is this going to impact me? How is this going to impact my mother and father? How is this going to impact my friends and, distant family? And you keep playing that out, you really realize that not a whole lot's going to change that quick.
Absolutely. And I think to your point about 3D printing, there always has been and there always will be these disruptive themes that come along. We're seeing that with AI right now, rightfully so. I mean, it's had a big impact, but a lot of the AI projects of today probably won't be around another few years from now. There will be some consolidation. There will be some prominent players that can outlast. That probably was true about the 3D printing companies. But yeah, to your point there, I think their biggest contribution was making fidget spinners, which was a whole nother phase that came and went. But that's the thing. There's always going to be these scares about, entire ways of doing things being disrupted. Some of that will, and actually, sorry, while we're still here, I just video conferencing was another one. Dropbox, or not Dropbox, excuse me, Zoom, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, whatever. That was the next big thing, super disruptive. But I don't think Zoom stocks, I think that one's in the dumps big time. But anyway, the point I'm trying to get to is there's always going to be these things that come along, and there's this big to do about them completely just uprooting the world as we know it. Some of those things might play out that way. Most of them will not. Most of them are just buzzwords. Most of them are trends that will come to pass. And this goes back to, knowing what to look for in an investment from a long-term perspective. That's what you look for. You look for the things that have the highest chance of just being around through all of these changing trends, through all of these different themes. Look for the things that are resilient to change and disruption. Look for the things that are agile enough to even go with that flow. If disruption looks imminent for them, they can actually disrupt themselves and be a part of whatever the new thing is and be a big player in there. And actually, I think, let's say hypothetically, this stable coin, or there's a big shift in payment processing. Visa's got their hand in all of this stuff. Whatever it is, they will, in MasterCard as well, and I'm sure Amex, they will make sure that they're a part of whatever the next thing is. So look for these companies that have both that resilience and also the optionality and the agility to um, zig and zag with the rest of the world as it changes and evolves.
Anti-Fragile is a phenomenal book. Did you read that book?
No, but I have
Things That Gain from Disorder.
I have Fooled by Randomness here by Nassim Taleb, because he wrote
Yeah, okay.
Anti-Fragile.
I'm sure it's
I
very similar.
I had a hard time getting through this one, man. It was all over the place to me. He definitely seems like an acquired taste. I've heard a lot better things about Anti-Fragile than I have Fooled by Randomness.
I haven't read Fooled by Randomness, so I can't speak to it, but Anti-Fragile is pretty good.
Mm.
He is definitely I want to say a higher intellect, so his writing is dull, if I
Yeah.
might say myself, you know. But he raises so many amazing points, you know, in Anti-Fragile. You have to remain resilient. And I think, you know, a lot of these companies like the Visas, and I want to use Procter and Gamble in this mix.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have a company that no matter what happens, I got to put deodorant on today. Well, I should be putting deodorant on today. You know, I got to use shampoo today. I got to like shave every now and then. So you have these companies that really are anti-fragile and they don't need to innovate. But then you got to look at, okay, what exactly, I'm not going to say, you know, the risk tolerance. I want to go in even a different direction from that and say, what's your patience level? Because sometimes when you're investing in some of these companies, and even if you are a bigger risk taker and it was the Teslas of the world that you want to invest into, you know, people threw money in to Tesla and rode a roller coaster for some time. And I think that's also something to think about, is no matter what you're investing into, there's going to be some patience required of you. And that's when you want to begin to look at financials. And then even then, again, it does really come down to that storyline and the visionary who's up at the reins. Because if you think about this, every time something happens with one of these big companies, big blue chips, the CEO's, you know, got to go. He gets kicked. Who always comes in next? A former CEO. Starbucks is notorious. How many times does Howard Schultz have to come off the retirement bench to bring Starbucks back, revive Starbucks? You know, and it's like the same story over and over again. And so I think sometimes what happens with a lot of these companies is they lose their focus. And this is where Apple actually did a phenomenal job. Steve Jobs really did set the tone at Apple to like carbon copy the Steve Jobs way. And so therefore we never really deviated much from that vision of thinking differently, so to speak. And even when you watch interviews, just to go back to that, of Tim Cook, the guy hardly ever takes any credit for himself. He always, the foundation was laid by Steve Jobs. Go right back to the core. And I think it's when you start to deviate from that core mission, you lose everything.
And values, mission,
Yeah.
and values and whatever. And then those things, you know, permeate through the entire company.
It happened, by the way, with Tesla when Elon Musk just bought Twitter, turned it into X, and all of his focus was over there. And everybody was like, well, you know, Tesla's kind of going downhill now. We kind of need you back, you know? And
Yeah.
every company, if you don't set the next leader up to take the reins and guide that company forward, like, you know, Berkshire Hathaway, there's a lot to be said. Like, what's it going to look like in 5 to 10 years? I'm curious to see it, because no matter what, it was Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett who sat in those seats at Investor Day and did their thing, you know, at the annual shareholder meetings, led the company. And so how are these, what's next? You know, that's the big question always. Who else? JP Morgan. Jamie Dimon is almost at retirement. I was reading an article the other day. And so who's going to take the reins?
A lot of big shoes to fill. And when it comes to Berkshire, there's kind of two camps of this. There's one camp that thinks it's going to get a lot worse after, Warren's gone. There's another camp that thinks Warren's best days are behind him, and it actually probably will benefit when he's not at the helm. And a lot of people use the Apple investment, as an example of that, and don't really credit that to him, and credit that more to Greg Abel, who's taken over. And it kind of sounds to me like what you described with. It kind of sounds to me like it was going to be what you described with Apple, where the foundation has been laid, the culture and the values are all intact, and they won't disrupt that, but maybe they will take those same ideals and those same values, and they will handle it slightly differently. It'll directionally the same, but they might make different decisions than Warren might make. But that's not necessarily that may not necessarily be a bad thing. So yeah, we'll just have to see what happens. It's going to be really interesting to see what kind of the next generation for Berkshire looks like.
Not only just Berkshire, I think a lot of these companies, man, time is going by, and I feel like all the CEOs that I used to look up to, and Buffett, Jamie Dimon is a CEO that I really do admire and look up to. But then you get some hedge fund managers in there that I like, Bill Ackman, Larry Fink, and Larry Fink's not a hedge fund manager. I want to make that clear. But I'm like, wow, man, all these guys are going to retire soon. Like, there are big shoes to fill. We're getting older. And I'm curious, some people don't know. This is crazy to think about. There's some people out there watching this right now that don't know the world that was with Steve Jobs.
What do you mean by that?
Some viewers watching us on the deep end right now talking about Steve Jobs never really, they didn't have Steve Jobs to watch on stage. They only knew Tim Cook.
Oh, okay. I see.
And I feel like it's we're at this, point in our lives, in our investing career right now, Ryan, where a lot of the current CEOs are about to enter retirement. And that creates a really interesting dynamic, I think.
You think Bill Ackman will retire? I think he's kind of a younger guy, right?
He's a younger hedge fund manager.
Is he still in his 50s? Or is he in his 60s already?
I don't know how. Let's just look real quick. I don't know. I don't want to.
He's got very gray hair, white hair, but he's got a young face.
He's 59 years old.
Oh, okay. So he's right there. But still, dude, he's entering his prime, if you ask me. He's got another good 35 years in him.
He still looks great, man. He looks young, looks fit, looks great.
It's all that Chipotle he's eating.
Yeah. I think also, when we live in an age too where just everything is gone. This is another crazy concept, by the way, to even think about. The poorest American today is wealthier, right, than those in the Great Depression. You think about this, the standards of living have increased that much. And I just want to take actually a moment to just say this, even you're either making excuses or you're making something happen, because we are literally living in the greatest, I think, age to just make something happen. Maybe it's a side income. Maybe it's, whatever it is, doing anything to invest in the market, even looking at investment vehicles that we have today, ETFs that are coming out. Whether you're a fan of leverage or not, you can make a hefty penny out of them. So I think there's so many opportunities out there that just no one has any excuses. That's what I love. But also at the same time of not having excuses, you do have to, I think these days, because there's so many options, you got to be a little more cautious with what you're doing. There's so many companies to invest into. You really got to do your due diligence on them. There's so many ETFs out there. You really got to hone in on like what exactly each ETF does. They all do different things.
There's so many side hustles. You know, don't do all of them or something.
Not all of them freaking work. Let's just say that. Like, you get some of these videos, you know, and 20 side hustles that can make you a millionaire in a year. You know, I'm like, okay, one, that creator is definitely not doing any of those 20. Two, a lot of the times when you start to do these side hustles, I don't know, maybe it's, you know, when we were growing up, man, we had like the take an online quiz and get like 5 cents. You remember those?
Oh yeah.
I was doing them. I don't think I ever collected any of my money from them either. It's like all a hogwash, you know?
Do you think, as time goes on, do you think more people will seek to, you know, do their own thing, create their own job, kind of forge their own path, and, you know, all these different and crazy options out there? Do you think people will lean more into those than, you know, normal 9 to 5s with all that opportunity out there? Because to your point, like it is, and we've talked about this quite a bit, it is now more possible than ever to create a job for yourself. Do you think more people will take advantage of that, or do these resources, because a lot of it happens through social media, I think, these days, or do you think that more people access to these tools just makes them more complacent and, you know, they consume instead of create? I guess what I'm asking is as time goes on, do you think more people will work to create their own thing and kind of be their own boss? Or do you think people will still, you know, go more for the 9 to 5 like has been historically the case?
I'm going to sound like a conspiracy theorist right now, but for a second, I just want to take everybody's minds to a place that sometimes I'm in. And I'm like, wow, this world really is controlled by like the top 1%. Hear me out here. Everything that we consume. Think about just Facebook alone. Facebook also has WhatsApp. It also has Instagram. And, you know, it doesn't have TikTok, but heck, it might as well. Everything everybody's consuming is literally brainwashing. Does not make anything the truth. You know, and I think we're veering very far away from the truth. Objective truths. And so where I think we get dicey waters, and why I'm even talking about this, is because the more we keep, it's like the social dilemma. I think is that the name of that documentary, The Social Dilemma?
Yeah.
So because we have very few people that are able to literally get inside of our heads. They know what we're thinking. I mean, think about, you say something. Before you even say something, sometimes your phone's already giving you an ad on it. So I think that's a really very scary. And I don't think we're ever going to be in a place. Let me put it this way. Gary Vaynerchuk always says that I will give you every card that I have, in knowing that you will never play the cards that I do, so to speak. And I think the same way. When I sit with somebody, whether it's you or anybody else, and we're having a conversation, I give you 110% of my energy, in knowing that no matter what, 9 out of 10, sometimes just 10 out of 10, like very few people are ever going to be able to actually come to the table with the cards that I have and play them the way that I do. Even if you have the cards that I have, you won't take the risk that I'll take. You won't move as quickly as I am. You won't risk the failures that I'm willing to risk. Like, you're just not going to play the game that I'm playing. And so I think that we will forever have the 1% club, so to speak. And no matter what happens, even in a creator's economy, I know we'd like to think we're veering away from like, this, I don't know, 1% like whatever you want to call it. I think there's always going to be a divide between the haves and the have-nots. That's a mindset. And I think to really get in the zone, I was talking with someone the other week, and he was sending me WhatsApp voice notes, and he was just going through a rough time. Guy's 45 years old, going through the ringer, and he's sending me these messages, and I gave him just a tidbit of a suggestion, piece of advice, whatever. And he goes, Ari, I'm really tired, of receiving an answer like that from you. I just want some validation. I just want you to validate me. And I said to him, Bud, I don't want to say his name, but I was like, Bud, I'm not your daddy. I'm not your dad. I'm not here to validate you. I'm going to give you man to man this is it. I don't know what you want. I'm not here to give you a hug and tell you everything's going to be all right. Life is hard sometimes. And there's so few people, Ryan, who operate like that. I don't, when life hits me, and life has smacked me on the face sometimes, I don't call my dad. I don't, cry on someone's shoulder. I might cry to myself. I might literally sit down in the shower and cry one out and be like, holy crap, like this is tough. But you know what?
But you don't let it paralyze you.
I shut that shower off. I stand up, I dry off, I get to work. And yeah. That's the 1% club right there. You don't need to be a billionaire to be a billionaire, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Think about Jeff Bezos. The guy, and people, how many times do you hear this? Like, they're robotic, right? They just do. They do. They keep. Tim Cook. Watch this guy. Like, I'm encouraging everybody. If you want to level up in life, go pick 2 or 3 CEOs that you really admire and watch how they speak, watch their actions, watch how they carry themselves, everything. Learn their schedule. Tim Cook waking up at 5 a.m. every morning. First thing he does, go through emails, then work out. Like every CEO has this. Jamie Dimon, 4:30, 5 a.m., reads 7 different newspapers. Warren Buffett, wake up early, reads 7 different newspapers, right? Like, and then you ask people where they want to be in life, and they're like, I want to be up here. And I'm like, then why are you playing like you're down here?
Yeah, I think it's easy to want to wait for the perfect conditions to start something, for all the stars to be in alignment before you take any sort of action. And we certainly, see that and have talked about that as it pertains to investing. People waiting to have X dollars saved, or waiting until they can invest X amount per week or per month, or waiting until the S&P gets down to this level. There's all sorts of different excuses for that. But I think a lot of people want the perfect situation before they start taking steps towards whatever it is, or before they start working towards making progress at whatever it is. But the fact of the matter is the conditions will never be perfect, number one. And number two, like, they don't have to. The conditions don't have to be perfect for you to make progress. I was thinking about this today, actually. I went on a nice 6-mile run this morning. Really wasn't feeling like it. I've ran quite a bit already this week, so I'm just tired. I got up early at like 5, and just not good conditions to go out for a run. It was really windy today, so it was just one of those days where I was like, man, I've done really well this week. Maybe I take today off and I'll just hit it hard tomorrow. And I'm like, no, I will so regret that. Once again, I thought it doesn't matter if it's windy. It doesn't matter if I'm tired. I know that the hardest part about this entire thing is just putting my shoes on and stepping out the front door. But as soon as I do, and as soon as I start getting into that stride, it's going to feel good. And after it's all said and done, I will feel so happy that I did it anyway, despite the conditions not being what I would have liked them to be. And yeah, sure enough, that was true. And I always think that that's a good proxy for this, for whatever it is. The conditions are, they're never going to be perfect, but they don't have to for you to make progress. You shouldn't wait for them, and you shouldn't worry about, hiccups that will happen along the way, because they inevitably will when it comes to reaching your goals. And also, tying this back to the stocks in our portfolio, it's the same exact thing as well. Companies are going to miss guidance every once in a while. They're going to have than softer revenue than they thought. But zooming out like that probably is not the first time that's happened for them. It's not going to be the last. And even despite that, they have still made progress, and they still have the resilience and the wherewithal to not let that really get in the way of their long-term goals. Um, and I could probably keep talking in a circle about this, so I'll shut my mouth right there. You know what I'm trying to say, though.
Yeah, yeah. Look, motivation's not going to work. Motivation is not going to work. It might, kickstart you for a moment or so, but it's consistency that's going to get you to where you want to go. It's consistency that's going to get those shoes on and get Ryan running in a, not so ideal day, a little bit windy, sometimes it's raining even. Like, I know those days. Those days suck. And you're like, this is the last thing I want to do. And I already ran 5 days out of the week, so I don't need to today. And then it's like that little thought, that consistency bubble. Boop. It's like, but you do.
You know what it
But
was,
you do.
man? You know what it is in those moments that really gets me to take the action? It's the thought that, no, this is what I do. I'm a runner. I do this. I do this, and it doesn't matter what the external situation is. This is what I do. Okay. And it's the same thing in my portfolio. I'm an investor. This is what I do. I buy stocks and I build up my shares in them. I don't care what analysts downgraded Zoetis today. I think this is a great company based on my own internal research in it and my own thoughts about it. I don't care externally what some analyst, has graded it today, because it's probably going to change tomorrow. And I do this anyway. I'm going to buy it anyway, because this is just what I do. This is who I am, and this is me. And you have to follow through on that.
That's exactly, I mean, that's it, and investing, as we always say, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so, when you're an investor, you invest. When you're a runner, you run. When you're a writer, you write. And I think something that's important is, classic I am that I am, right? So if you start telling yourself, I am this, then become that. And I think to answer your last question, will everybody start to go in the direction of kind of becoming their own CEO? You can write in whatever freaking box you want to write, whether it's on Instagram, Facebook, or whatever else, TikTok, you're the CEO of your own company. Yeah, sure. But there's a way that CEOs operate. They don't let up when times get tough. They don't call it quits in 2 or 3 months when they're not getting enough views. Like, look at me and you, man, in this game of just building YouTube channels out for 3 years or whatever it's been now. Longer.
I'm going
But
on 5, I think. 4.5 at this point.
yeah, man, you went from, like, it's just crazy growth, and as for me, I don't care how hard it's been, working a full-time job and building a YouTube channel, all the sacrifices along the way. But you know what? I've never missed, aside from one time when I was in Greece. I know somebody in the comments will be like, you missed that one time. I was in Greece and I forgot to send myself the video, so I couldn't post. And so I sent a picture to everybody. But that was like the one time out of years. And I was pissed at myself, and Talia, my ex, was actually like, it's okay, babe. Like you've done, for so long, you've never missed. I'm like, it's not okay. Like that's how you operate, though. It's not okay to miss a day of running, because that one day can turn into a new mindset. At least that's how I look at it. And so it really is. It's like that 1 week, that 2 months, that vacation that you're thinking about taking that you really can't afford, but you want to because everybody else is going on vacation. That's going to mess up your retirement. Sorry, go make more money, Like, it's the way I think.
Yeah, and today, like, I'm going to take tomorrow off from running. That's kind of usually I've ran every day since actually last Friday. I ran Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, today, Wednesday. So tomorrow I'm taking it off. And so I was like, that was another thing. I was like, no, go get it done. You are supposed to do this today. You told yourself you had planned for this. You better follow through on that. And then, you can follow through on your rest day tomorrow, which is still, I'll still get some steps in, but I'm not going to run. I'm just going to walk, a little active recovery. But let's
don't you love that self-talk, man? That voice. Like for me, I have the same thing. I was studying Series 7. I had to take the SIE, so then I switched manuals. I started studying for the SIE, passed the SIE, back to the Series 7. And I'm like, I'm going to start the Series 7 manual from scratch. And I'm going to finish the Series 7 manual in 18 days.
Mm-hmm.
And every day I'm like, oh, I don't want to do another chapter. And I'm like, but you said to yourself that you were going to do it in 18 days. So it's like, damn, Ari, you're right. Like,
if you want to, you can talk yourself in and out of everything. Other people can, if you let other people give the excuse for you and they tell you it's okay, you'll listen to that. So you have to be, unfortunately, your harshest critic and your most brutal and honest, I guess, confidant in a sense. That's not really the right word, but you have to be that person for yourself that tells you to push through when you don't want to.
Not only will you have to be your toughest critic, but here's the real thing. When you have something on your mind, a goal or whatever it is that you're looking to achieve, you will honestly be the one to talk yourself out of it and then go to other people to co-sign your BS.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
So that's really what happens. You start to generate your own excuses and then you look to justify it by going to other people and you're like, I didn't run today because this, and this, but that's okay, right? That's why when people come to me, I'm like, again, this guy the other week, I'm like, no, I'm not going to give you a hug and tell you everything's going to be okay. You're going through something right now that's called the suck. And it's just going to suck for a little bit of time. But you know what? You're going to get through it. And I'm not going to be your daddy figure here to give you a pat on the back. And, I think, again, he was all upset. But you know what? After like 30 minutes, he sent me these other voice notes. He's like, I really appreciate you, just being real with me. And it's like, yeah, you were having a moment, an emotional moment, whatever. But I'm not going to cater to that. I'm not going to tell you, here's a pat in the back and take it easy today, guy. I'm going to tell you to get the hell out there.
In the short term, he wanted to hear what he wanted to hear. But in the long run, you told him what he needed to hear. And with some more time to reflect on that, he understood that.
Yeah, the bounce back is then real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not to continue on, on this tangent, but I have to have those same talks to myself on the other side. I have to talk myself into doing the hard thing, but I also have to talk myself into taking the rest or, loosening the belt when it's necessary to do that too. Like tomorrow, like I said, I'm probably going to go on a walk for a mile, maybe a mile and a half. But there will be a part of me that's like, I should just run. If I'm going out if I'm going out, I might as well just run. I'll just get 3 miles. No big deal. So I have to kind of like talk myself down a little bit too. Like, no, it's okay. This is part, in the same way that you talked yourself into the hard thing today, you need to follow through on the rest day today, because this is your time to do that. So take advantage of it. So I always have to talk myself. It's that balance. You have to keep yourself balanced in that way too. It's like with budgeting too, right? You have to talk yourself maybe into investing at first, but then once you get in the groove of it and you get hooked on investing and contributing to your portfolio, at some point you also have to talk yourself back into being more balanced with your budget, and at a certain point being okay like going to get In-N-Out Burger every once in a while, or being okay like going and spending money on some discretionary thing or on a vacation, even though it takes away from this. You have to also kind of pull yourself back into that balance. You know what I mean?
Oh, 100%, man. I do that with Cornetta ice creams all the time. It's
Yeah.
a big thing.
Yeah.
Cornetta ice cream. I was laughing because as you were talking and saying sometimes I have to talk myself into taking the rest day. Well, definitely, me too. And finally, this week right now I'm supposed to be actually on the vacation. I was supposed to go to the conference to speak, and I planned this whole vacation for myself. And so I'm laughing because I'm like, I almost feel like it's like God's like, no, you're not. I tell you when you're gonna take the vacation, bud. So it's funny. You can plan for anything and everything. It's the classic, you plan, God laughs, so to speak. And I think you just got to do the best that you can to just make sure that you have mental sanity. Because even on a day that, let's just say, man, you wanted to go on a run this morning, but then, I don't know, depending on where you're at in the world, like something's really going down, right? Like sometimes we just don't have control. And so therefore I say, I guess it comes back. It's funny how it ties back into this anti-fragile.
Hmm.
You have to be malleable.
Well, it's about like your perspective on the how you approach those things can really have an impact on, I guess, how you respond to them and what you do with those things that happen, those unpredictable events. And things, you can either think of things as happening to you or happening for you. And like in the case of running today, for example, like I could have looked at, my tiredness. I could have looked at, um, the wind, whatever was unideal about, the setup today. I could have looked at that as, woe is me. This is happening to me. Poor Ryan. He has to go out and, not everything's perfect. But instead, you're better off doing it and facing it because it's harder, because the setup is harder. And that's actually, those obstacles are really what make you better and build that anti-fragility. That's what builds that resilience, is being able to do those things even when the cards are stacked against you, so to speak. And it's like the wind was blowing in my face. It sucked when it was happening to me, but it was also good for me because it made it harder. That's good for me. So that was happening for me. And that's how I try to look at it, if that makes sense.
You can either have strong character or an easy life. You can't have both. And the cost that one of those is going to cost you is the price of the other one.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are you going to do? And you know what, man? I think most people are going to seek comfortability. And so most people won't see the light of day in terms of building their own business and financial freedom and these passive income streams to the likes of what people are watching on YouTube or wherever. I was going to say like MTV Cribs or something, but